What's up, knockers? Shawn Taylor here from nerdsofcolor.org, and I am here with my really good friend, Claribel Ortega. Hi, Claribel. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I am well. This is the second time we saw each other in a week,
Yes.
virtually. And so we are here to talk about this you see
Ghost
behind
Squad.
me, Ghost Squad. So what was it about this subject material that really got you think, you know what, this is a book, this is something I really want to dive into?
Right. So it was really multifaceted for me, the reason why I wanted to tell this particular story. Part of it was sort of the things that I grew up with in terms of media, like, you know, the Goonies and Adventures in Babysitting, and all of these sort of adventures where kids were outside of their house doing stuff that they weren't necessarily supposed to do, which to me as a kid growing up in the South Bronx was like, whoa, you can like ride your bike far away. Like, I would never, like, I had like a block. I was like, you're allowed to go to the corner store and back, and that's it. Once the sun is down, you're inside. I had all these rules. So seeing these kids do that, it was so cool. But I had never really seen kids that looked like me do any of those kinds of adventures. So that was definitely part of it. I wanted to have little girls, little black and brown girls on bikes having adventures and saving the day with like a spooky element, because that's another thing that I really loved growing up, all these like scary stories. A huge fan of like Hocus Pocus and the witches and all of those things. Goosebumps obviously was a huge influence for me as a child. I read through all of those books. But then also another aspect of it is the folklore in the book, which stems from Dominican Republic. So in the book, my main character, Lucely, lives with the ancestors of her lost loved ones. In her backyard, they live as ghosts / fireflies. They sort of switch between both. And the Dominican folklore says that fireflies are the ancestors of our lost loved ones, that are looking over us and protecting us. So I thought that that was like a really beautiful and poignant thing to include in the story, and a good way for me to sort of explore loss and grief in a way that was accessible to children, and in a way that adults would also hopefully understand, and it would resonate with them as well. So I wanted to balance the two things. I wanted to have like a fun, spooky adventure with kids that were like me. And I also wanted to talk about this like really hard thing, which is like losing somebody who you love. And that's how Ghost Squad was, came about.
Yeah, and there's just something that's so different when you read about, say, Western writers, and you read from West Indians, Latinx writers, that we don't see death as being this zombies or vampires or something completely scary. We see death as being as integral to our lives, our familial situations, as life is. And I'm wondering, what do you think that break is, that positionality? Because it's like, we have zombies in the West Indies, of course, we have Haiti and things like that, but there's always more of a loving for our dead than it is a fear. So I'm wondering if you have any ideas like why that is, or why you think it is personally.
Well, I think that we have in Dominican Republic, we have a really strong emphasis on respect for our elders, and for that, and then that translates into respect for people who have moved on to the other side. And we talk about them in a way that it's like they're still there with us, like they're still part of our family. There's something to be like embraced and celebrated and remembered every year. We have these altars to them in our homes at all times. My brother passed away, I think about 11 years now. My mom still has like an altar to him, like in the house. She has his picture, she talks to him, we celebrate his birthday. Like all of these things still happen. Even though he is not here with us physically, we still believe that his spirit is with us, that he's watching over us, that he is somehow a part of us. And that is just part of I think probably religions that were taken away from us in a way from times past, and that stuck with us, and it's just part of our culture. Like if anybody's ever seen Coco, it's that idea that those people that you love that are not with you anymore, you still honor them. And that was really important for me to always said my entire life, don't fear the living, don't fear the dead, fear the living. And to her, that's basically it in a nutshell. The people who are around us can actually cause us harm. The people who have passed can't. So that's just another part of a facet of my culture that I wanted to share. And I think that is really beautiful because you can pull all of this like strength and beauty from your ancestors, right? There's this Toni Morrison interview where she was talking about how when she really gave into the idea of like this, her ancestors and spirits, and let herself tell those stories and let those stories come through her, that's when she really started to see beautiful things happen. And a lot of times those like superstitions, right, are like beat out of us, and people don't want us to believe those things anymore. But when we embrace them, when we embrace that part of our culture, it can be a really beautiful thing. And I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, it's just like, don't believe in spirits, but believe in transubstantiation.
Right.
Eat the body, drink the blood. Like, yo,
Right.
wait a minute. You told us not to rock over here, but you want us to do this now? That's a bad look, Catholic Church. So one thing that you said earlier, it's like, there's always like this kids on bikes, right? That's a trope now, right? And whether it's Stranger Things, which basically just took from Goonies, which, there's like a whole genre, I think it's in either Hong Kong or mainland China, of all these kids just having adventures with no adults around on these adventures. And there's something about that. And being you having two girls of color, black and brown girls, having an adventure without boys, which was the thing that my 12-year-old was like, Pop, this is dope. Like, this is the greatest thing ever. She's like, I'm gonna be Ghost Squad for Halloween. And then then the pandemic hit him together. She was like, well, I guess I'll just be Ghost Squad in the bedroom, Daddy. Like, this is there's something about this idea of just girls on an adventure being the seeker character, being the, and it wasn't like this, I have a destiny to fulfill. It was like based out of love and based out of, I'm gonna have my adventure, the genesis point be loss. And it's not a revenge story, because normally when you talk about loss, it's a revenge story. This was a reclamation story. So I was wondering, how did you avoid the trap of making her like, I gotta get revenge on the people who did this, as opposed to I gotta save the people?
So that really just stemmed from Lucelli as a character, right? Like Lucelli, I like to say that Lucelli and Sid, her best friend, are like the two different parts of me. Sid is like the really cool,
from the Bronx.
Like, yeah, like will do anything, funny, like she's got this. And Lucelli is like the more caring, like nurturing, like made of anxiety part of me, right? So I really wanted to have a character like her that was like, that felt like a real kid. You know what I mean? That felt like a real kid, that felt like I want to do something, I can do something, but I'm still afraid, and I want to save the things that are most important to me, right? And as a kid, like your whole world is your family and your friends, right? Like, and that like one friend that Lucelli has is everything to her. And like for her to lose her family, like she, she's not, she doesn't have like her pottery class that she goes to. She doesn't have her relationship. All she has is her family. So that's the most important thing to her. So to me, it was very natural that she would want to help and to save the thing that was most precious to her, especially a kid coming from a single parent home. Her and her dad are a team. She knows that she has to pick up the slack for the things that he can't do. That's why we see her making herself grilled cheese sandwiches and stuff, because he's working, so he can't always make food for her. So she has to fend for herself a lot. And that is such a reality for so many children who have to grow up really quickly. So I wanted to make it more of like Lucelli feeling like, this is my responsibility to help. Like I sort of started this a little bit in a way, and I need to fix it. I need to fix this thing that I'm a part of somehow. And I feel like for kids of immigrants especially, like I get it. I had so many responsibilities as a child, and I wanted to show that through Lucelli. I wanted to show that you know, kids like that are heroes every day. They're doing things that you would probably, like, more privileged people would probably say, oh, that's unrealistic, you know, like that would never actually happen to a kid. But it's happening all around us every day. There's kids who have even more responsibility and more things on their plate, who are raising kids who are 1-2 years younger than they are, while their parents are working all day long. And I think for me, a kid like that would do exactly what Lucely did, which is, I have to save my family. This is the only thing I have. It's the right thing to do. So yeah, I hope that answered your question.
No, it does. No, it does, because it's so easy to get on the revenge track when something is lost.
Right.
And so being able to have a generative arc as opposed to a reductive arc, it was dope. And for me, excuse me, you know, I've read some reviews of the book before in preparation, and a lot of, and I'm like, how many reviewers missed the mark? It's like, that seems so immature. They're kids, you moron. Like, as somebody who is raising a 12-year-old girl right now, the amount of emotional magnification for things, like, that's my best friend, and if I don't, I mean, like, there was that, I'm like, does she have kids this age? Because it's so on point. But how, and so I was wondering, did you interview kids, listen to kids? Did you go back to your, like, how did you get the voices so like age appropriately authentic?
I like to joke that I'm still 12 in my heart. But the truth is, I'm very lucky that I have 5 nieces and nephews. And 2 of them were around the same age as Sid and Lucely as I was writing everything. So shout out Maya and Samantha. And they helped me. They read the book. They gave me feedback. They were really great in that sense. But I still read a lot of middle grade. I'm still around kids a lot because I do class visits. I teach creative writing to kids sometimes through you know, through my author persona. So I'm still around them a lot, and I listen to them, you know what I mean? And I remember what it was like to be 12. And I feel like one really big thing that happens in Kidlit is that a lot of adults read these middle grade and these YA books, which is totally fine, right? But I think somewhere along the line, people forget that the books are not meant for them. They're not written for them. They can enjoy them, but they're written with children in mind. And I think that's why we also have this like really weird thing of sometimes kids being feeling like adults on the opposite end of the spectrum and feeling way too mature, because it's like catering to that audience, right? It's catering to that older audience. And I think that's really a mistake, because we're pushing the kids that these books are meant for. We're pushing them out of their own, you know, bubble. So I get it. Every single Kidlit author gets those kinds of reviews. It's one of the most contentious things. Like, people always complain about it. It's like, oh my God, this character's so mature. It's like, they are literally 12 years old. Like, you aren't remembering what it was like when you were 12. You're applying the lens of a 30, 40, 20-year-old to a 12-year-old, and it's not going to work, you know? And
a 12-year-old kid of color, and I'm from Brooklyn, so Brooklyn or the Bronx, is different than a 12-year-old privileged kid on the Upper East Side. Like, they're gonna have a different experience in how they engage with life.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think people forget, like, if you ever moved as a kid, it was like the worst thing ever. Like, moving as a kid was like, oh my God, my life is over. Like, I am never going to be happy again. I'm never going to find friends like this again. And you really feel that in your heart. And Lucely really feels that. She feels that if she leaves, she's never going to find a friend like Sid. And, you know, maybe she won't because their friendship is really special. So I think sometimes we sort of dismiss the emotion of children. We get on our high and mighty adult horse. But I think that the emotions,
which is actually
kids,
a wooden horse that just rocks back and forth and goes nowhere.
Because none of us know what we're actually doing. But kids' emotions are so, they're so honest. They're so honest. And I think a lot of times, if we were honest with ourselves, the things that we cared about and that we talked about would look a lot more like what Lucely and Sid care about. But we want to, you know, pretend we're tough and we're over it when it's not true.
At all. No, anybody who dabbles in, like, I mean, I'm saying this is kind of like fantasy horror, but I don't know how you would classify it. So I'm going to ask this question as I would ask any horror person, a horror author. Did you get any nightmares while writing this? Did you have any weird experiences while writing it or reviewing it?
I probably did get like one or two nightmares with the spirit monster, and also there were actually one or two scenes we had to cut that were too scary, because
for you or for the audience?
For the audience, according to my editor. So and no, and I agree. Like looking back, I was like, yeah, that was like a little bit too much. But there's a storyline. Part of the storyline is that the ghosts are reliving their death, right? So that part kind of freaked me out a little bit. And I think that that's really like where like the scary part stemmed from for me. But for the most part, I was okay. I was okay. I think there's enough like light in Ghost Squad to like balance out the scariness. So yeah.
Because that's just the West Indian in me, right? Because every time I think about people messing with spirits, I'm like, I hear my grandma's voice. Don't play, like, you know. I'm like,
yeah,
oh yeah, maybe. And intellectually, you're like, you know, probably not. But the folk life in you is always at war with the modernity of you, especially if you grow up in a house that's really like embedded in their folk life or embedded in their folk life.
Right. And I think more to that point, when I made up the spells, like the spells that are used throughout the book, I think those moments I was kind of like, what if I do something by an accident? What if I'm like, something goes wrong because I'm making these spells up? But then I was like, I'm fine. I should be fine.
That's just something, you know, like it's because you know, we never know. Like, you know, rationally we know. I'm agnostic about. I'm just like, I haven't been shown yet, but I've had some experiences in my life where I have no rational explanation.
Right.
Where it left like a spooky scar, and it's like not full trauma yet, but just right at that part where you're like, oh, I can't explain it.
Right. Well, I think it's really dangerous to be very confident in thinking that you know everything. I'd rather say that there are some things that we don't understand or know, because the moment that you think you know everything, that's when life proves you wrong.
And so Sid's, there's a passage here I really wanted to pull out, but I don't want to read it because I hate the sound of my own voice a lot. But first of all, I'm going to skip on that. But the cat. Let's talk about Chunk. Let's talk about Chunk. Was that an homage to the Goonies, or just because it was a fat cat?
It was an homage to the Goonies. So Babette in the book, she has 8 cats, I believe, and each one is named after one of the Goonies. Including Sloth. Like Sloth is included in that as one of the Goonies too. So it's Sid's favorite movie because of Babette. And so when Babette started getting cats, Sid was like, we have to name them after the Goonies. So all of Babette's cats are named after the Goonies. And it was definitely my homage to that movie because it was a big inspiration for me wanting to write something like this. Definitely one of my favorite movies. It has, like anything in the 80s, not perfect, has issues, but I think the story behind it and the friendships behind it are really poignant, and like they hold up. The funny thing about the Goonies is the only Latinx character in the Goonies is actually the maid, right? Which is like that cliche, but she ends up saving the day at the very end, which a lot of people forget. So Rosa, shout out to her. Right.
So this for me, like, I'm a sense person, right? First of all, I think Babette is a wonderful character, and I think it was cool to make her. Is this gonna sound weird? Kind of hot. Like, she's kind of hot. She's not like, she's not a crone.
Yeah, like, no, she's
like,
cool.
Normally you would somebody write this character as a crone character, right? But I'm like, wow, that's kind of fly. Like, what was it about crafting her that you avoided the typical witch trope?
I wanted to avoid the idea that being older meant that you were somehow like ready to be put out to pasture. I really I speak out a lot against ageism because I think it's really gross, and I think that I wanted to show a character that was older, that was self-possessed, that was confident, that took care of herself, and that still wanted to be part of adventures, because that, I think a lot of times people feel like once you hit a certain age, you're not going to have goals anymore, or things aren't going to matter to you anymore. That's not how it works. Like, you're still wanting throughout your life. And I wanted to show that in Babette. I wanted to show that you could be older and that you could be amazing. And I think Babette is the coolest character in the book. Like, she has gray dreads and her license plate says "eat my dust." Like, she is so I aspire to be Babette when I'm older, you know. And I just really wanted to show that. I wanted to show that respect for elders that I spoke about before is also a really important part of our culture, you know. That translates, because when you stop respecting somebody at a certain age, then it's like it goes to, you're not going to respect them after their death, right? And for us, it's like that respect, it continues, and it heightens. And I really wanted to show that. And I also wanted to show the dynamic between like grandparents and grandchildren. It's very different than a parent and a child, right? You can get away with a lot more with your grandparents. And I wanted to show that in Babette being like, listen, I don't got a lot to do right now, so I'm going to go with you. I just thought that was so funny. I really love it. I just love her so much.
And so we usually round out the author interviews with, like, I read a passage, we talk about the passage, and then we ask a couple of questions. But this is a passage I found, because I'm a sense person when I read books. So this is great. Babette's backyard was enclosed by a dense perimeter of trees and hedges, concealing it from what she liked to call nosy Nellies. Strings of light spanned the width of the lawn, making the property look like Lucelli imagined a fairy glen would. The pleasant aroma of lavender and rosemary carried over from the herb garden. Sid launched herself onto the cushioned swing that hung from an ancient-looking oak, almost causing the entire thing to collapse. What? Bars! Bars! Bars right there. Like, have you been to Florida? Like, did you live there before? Like, what was...
Yeah, so my parents live there, and my parents bought a house in Florida when I was, I think, at the tail end of my high school career. So I spent a lot of summers there. I have a lot of family there. My grandmother, most of, I would say, I have a huge family. I think all but like 2 uncles, and I have like over 20 live in Florida. So I spent a lot of my childhood going there, and I really wanted to, especially with like Babette's house, I wanted to really show that feeling of a place that you go when you're a kid and you feel like it's magic. And I feel like there was always like that one Diaz house, or like that had like crystals, or like, you know, and it was like, whoa, this is so cool. You wanted to like touch everything. And I wanted to like make that, but like amplify it for Babette's house. And, you know, Florida gets a bad rap because Florida be wildin' sometimes, like, let's be real. But there's also such really cool stuff about Florida. Like, I love like looking at the swamps, and like the nature in Florida can be really beautiful. The animals and like everything, and the community. There's such a huge Latinx community in Florida, which is part of why we based Ghost Squad there, because we wanted it to be a place where Lucelli would be and where she would fit in. So Florida was inspired because, you know, Florida inspired me because of that, because I did spend a lot of time there. And it was, I guess, to me, the closest that I feel to Dominican Republic when I'm in the States, because of the heat, because of all the community. So I wanted to sort of like recreate that feeling, and like the water and the ocean, and like being near the water is like, I love that, and I don't get as much of it now. So I wanted to make sure that was part of the story.
Yeah, because for me, it's like it would be easy to set it in New York, right? It'd be easy, right. And so being able to have that, and like, and it's weird because when I was reading all of the sensory cues, it felt more like sense memory than narration or description.
Right.
And so for me, it felt, because I live through my nose. I come from a family, I'm the only one in my family not a cook. So like I'm like I'm the only one in the family not in the restaurant business, right? I mean, I can cook, but I'm not built for that life.
Right. It's hard.
I'm not built for that life. Like we lost one of our restaurants in Sandy. I mean, like kind of recovered from that, you know.
Yeah.
It's just I'm not built for that life. But, you know, Jamaican food is raw. So I love it. but so I lived through my nose and I'm like, wow, like they go into that old fort, the crypt, and I'm like, I'm smelling this thing, and then even in my mind, I'm like, I bet you ghosts kind of stank. You know, I'm in my mind, you know, because of just all of the things that are happening. But, one thing that really struck me was when it ended, it's a complete story, but there is potential for sequels, right? And for me, I'm gonna use the author like, nah, I'm done. No, but like, because usually some books are like, here is the sequel. You know, you're like, really? That's gonna set me up? But it was a complete story. Like I bought this book like 14 times and I've actually given it to 14 different kids. But for birthdays and stuff. But my thing is, like, are there plans for Sid and Lucelli to have an adventure, for further adventures?
I would love to do that. Right now, contractually, I have some other stuff in the pipeline. Publishing it's complicated in that, like, if I have another middle grade book coming, I can't have another one on top of that because Barnes and Noble is not going to shelf both of my my new middle grade books at the same time. So I do have an idea for a sequel. I would love to write a story from Sid's point of view, because I am obsessed with Sid. But we'll see. I also have ideas of like a Babette and Chunk origin story. I have a lot of different
want the Babette trilogy.
Yeah.
Babette Greylocks and post-apocalyptic out there with a cat with a patch on and a little wooden foot. I'm so down.
That would be so cool. Yeah, I feel like there's a lot in this sort of universe to play around with. There's a lot more ideas, even with like La Brujas Moradas. Like I made that up, so like I can do so much with that as well. So hopefully in the future, I mean, there are plans for a movie that's being done in the background.
Yeah, I saw the Dateline or the Deadline article.
So you never know, like if that comes to fruition and it's a big hit, then
yeah.
But we'll see.
But that La Brujas Moradas had me going to Google. Like, because the mythology, because your lore is so well structured and so well presented. So I'm like, let me see if they really exist.
Well, because I take parts of the truth and weave it in there, right? So it's almost like, oh, it could happen because this makes sense because this part is actually true, but it's completely made up. So yeah. A lot of people ask me if it's true and they're really disappointed when I tell them it's not.
I know, I was mad as hell. I was like, really?
I'm sorry.
Really? So in the spirit of talking about ancestors and influences, who would you give your literary shout outs to, flowers, living or dead, who had a key influence on you? Who are your top three that maybe we should read or who you feel have influenced you the most?
Well, definitely I would say Daniel Jose Older is one of the top people because his books made me feel like it was okay to include my my culture and people who look like me in my writing. That we have to give ourselves permission to do that. It's kind of strange, but it's reality. And so definitely Daniel Jose Older is one of them. I would say R.L. Stine for sure, because his books made me want to write as a child, and they pushed me in the direction of all these other spooky things that I loved and that kept me reading throughout my entire life. And then I would definitely also say Elizabeth Acevedo's, because to see another Dominican author out there sort of killing it and like getting all the awards and accolades and really touching so many people with her writing is super inspiring to me. And yeah, I would say those are my three. There's so many more, but
yeah,
those are three I'll give you.
No, yeah, I think it's important because I think that sometimes we as creatives, sometimes we get a little bit precious about our art. And I think it's really important that we talk about our influences.
Oh, for
because
sure.
then that gets other people to actually seek out those influences. And then
Yeah.
the good people rise to the top and the trash people don't.
Yeah.
and I'm all for stunting the progress of the trash people.
Yep.
So you right now are in a group of kids right now. You can give them one piece of writing advice to say goodbye with. What would you give aspiring creators?
I would say just write the story that you want to read and don't be afraid of what anyone's going to think about it.
So Claribel, I want to thank you for this wonderful, inspirational, educational interview. Everybody, buy Ghost Squad. I'm going to put the link in the notes. As we all know, reviews are magical. So if you dug it, write the review, because the more reviews good books get, the algorithm changes, more people can discover the book, and your favorite authors can keep on writing. Everybody, Shawn Taylor, Nerds of Color, and we out.